Welcome to my free series of leadership and ritual facilitation videos. You can donate to help me offer more of these classes and write on these topics. There's more information in the video details below.
You asked a question, I don't really have a fantastic answer for it. It's how do you handle public ritual and hecklers and protesters? And I will be honest, I have never actually experienced that on my own. I have heard of stories of my mentors having to deal with it, and they did the same thing they did for the polka music. They said, I want to say that it was at Pagan Picnic in St. Louis, and they sent out a big wave of love to the protesters. And they asked, they said, "You're welcome to join us if you'd like." And that kind of took the wind out of the protesters' sails a little bit because they were kind of confused by that. But also it let everybody in the ritual know that, like, yes, we know there's protesters out there, and we're going to move right along and do this ritual. But I have not, I would probably just handle it the same way I handle when an altar's on fire, just figure out a way to roll with it. But you did mention that you had a story on this, so I'm interested in hearing your story.
So this story may or may not actually make it to the final cut. The story goes that it was a local Pagan Pride Day, and the protesters had shown up as they often do. They were trying to hand out flyers and their own pamphlets and things like that, but they would leave them on the benches. So the people who were putting on the Pagan Pride Day would actually pick up the pamphlets and say, "Oh, you dropped something. Please take your garbage home. We like to keep the park clean." And the rest of the story goes, one of their children basically broke away from the main group and started dancing to all the drumming music. Oh, it gets better. And the question was heard, "Oh my God, are they going to eat that child?" Oh, and the response was, "Oh no, we don't have a permit for that." And the protester actually thought we were serious. And just kind of lost my mind at it. Like, wait, you think really in public? Are you sure? So yeah, it's the hecklers, the protesters. Another time in main ritual, basically there were people they probably weren't happy to be there, but they were specifically, when we did call and response parts, they would respond a half a second too late or ahead of time, just to make sure that they were drawing attention to themselves and things like that. Fortunately, at that time, we had someone to ask them to, "If you're not going to play nice, please leave." So yeah, those were the things that happened in my little world here.
We don't have a permit to eat the children is definitely probably not what Pagan Pride National would or International would recommend as a public relations strategy, and yet
like I said, it may not make it to the final cut, but
I think it's fine. That's funny. Yeah, that's yeah, the people engaging in the ritual in a really annoying way. Like, I don't have that happen in a lot of mine, but part of that is because I think I call it charisma bullying, which is like, I'm just so focused and intent on the energy of what I want to achieve, and I make it really clear up front that this is what we're doing, that I make that strong container with my will. And I'm not really giving people the space of, that it's okay to go do this thing over here that's really disruptive. I'll tell you one of my funny ritual stories. I don't think I've told this one very much. Because it's painful to remember because of the relationship dynamics. It's amusing in retrospect just because of the behavior. So here's what I mean. So again, without going into all the heavy logistics, I've written a number of blog posts and articles about my abusive relationship with my former fiance, and I've used that as a way to talk about sex and ethics and leadership and things leaders shouldn't do. And one of the things leaders shouldn't do is lie to community members and say that they're poly, and use that as a way to get community members and students to cheat with them. And that was what my ex was doing, and he was cheating on me with. She was a member of our group who had become, she had volunteered to join our leadership team. So he and I got back together after that, and we could talk about my choices in relationships and the wisdom of this, but I thought he had a nervous breakdown, and I thought that it was like okay to get back together with him. So in this process of getting back together with him, he had broken up with the woman he was cheating on me with, but she was still on his planning team. So he did a public ritual where he had, I'll leave the name out of it. He had brought in a big name pagan to present in Chicago, and he was trying to do a unity ritual. And so he and I had done a mediation session, and we were in the process of trying to reconnect. And, but I wasn't on his planning team for this event. Like, he had his own clique of people. But at the last minute, like literally minutes before the ritual started, he said, "Can you lead the chanting? Because the people I have leading the chanting don't really know how to do it." And so I said, "Sure, I can do the energy raising." I said, "Would you like me to do anything else?" And he said, "Yeah, can you do a deity invocation? Could you do that kind of general deity invocation thing that you do?" And I said, "Yeah, I can do that." That's why it's good to have those extemporaneous skills, because you can just kind of roll with it and go. And so so we had a number of different facilitators doing pieces of this ritual from different traditions. So they were bringing in their own tradition players. So these two folks did their piece before mine, and they were very big and bombastic, and they had a lot of theatrical training. So it was all very big and very loud. And so their contrast is a really great skill for ritual. Like if somebody has done something really big, you probably after that want to do something very, very in and very focused. And so they went very loud, so I went very quiet. And so what I did was I did one pass around the circle, and I walked around, and I just looked into people's eyes, and I said, "Shh, listen." And I did that, and I got people into that place of silence, and I said, "Can you listen to the voice of the gods?" And then I went on to engage people, and I was just trying to get them all physically involved. And I said, can you do a movement? Can you make a sound to bring your presence here, to bring the gods here? And I don't remember exactly what I was saying, but as I'm walking by the circle where this woman was, who my ex had now at this point broken up with, and she knew that I was she was on the outs and I was on the ins. And as I walk by, I said, "And can you join your energy here by making a movement, doing a movement or making a sound?" And so her movement was she folded her arms and she stomped her foot. Made this total pouty face and stomped her foot. And I just laughed. I was like, "Okay, that's your movement, okay." And I remember that as far as, a lot of people will ask me, what do you do in ritual when you've got somebody who is intentionally there to disrupt your ritual? And really I have two answers for that. One is, like, if I'm doing a ritual or even a workshop, if I'm doing a ritual or a workshop at a conference or a festival, and I'll just refer to, this specific X is there, he is not permitted to be there. I do not have to deal with his energy. I don't have to. I don't have to put up with that. I have the right to ask him to leave that ritual, and I feel completely comfortable doing that. That being said, I have facilitated rituals like this one I just mentioned, or at least in this particular instance, I was facilitating pieces of the ritual. But sometimes you're going to be in the facilitator role, and there are people there who do not wish you well. And they're depending on how much acting out they're doing. Like if they're just there to be passive aggressive and stare at you, hoping it'll make you be uncomfortable, whatever. She stomped her foot like a 5-year-old, and if she thought that was going to disrupt my cool, an altar on fire doesn't disrupt my cool, so her stomping her foot is not gonna disrupt my cool. So as far as the disruption goes, there's two answers to it. Like if somebody is being exceptionally disruptive in a way that's very clear to the rest of the group, their cell phone is going off and they're not turning it off, if they're doing other disruptive stuff, if they're having side conversations and they don't stop, or if it's your ex or someone who was in that coven with you but now hates your guts and they're doing something very outwardly disruptive. So I'm not talking about psychic attack because I can't speak to that, because that's not really, I don't work with psychic attack. I that's a whole separate workshop. But if they are doing something physically disruptive, they're speaking out of turn, if they're doing something physically disruptive, you have the sovereign right to go and ask them to stop. And if they continue, you have the sovereign right to ask them to leave your ritual. It does help if you have somebody there who's willing to assist you with that process. But, you can absolutely ask for that. If they're not doing anything specifically disruptive, and it would be really way more disruptive for you to kick them out, there are times when it's really better to just roll with it and let them stand in the back and glare at you. And if they're getting a power trip off it, okay, it's not actually doing anything to you. It's really not. You can ignore it. I'm trying to think, because there was something that came to mind and then it left my brain. It flew away. But yeah, I don't remember what I was going to say with that. Anyways, it's you can ask people to leave. Oh, I know what I was going to say. One of the other questions, I've heard this question in an unnatural amount of times, which is really concerning to me. What do you do when the high priestess of a local coven shows up at your ritual and while you are leading the ritual tells you are doing it wrong? I have heard this happening more times than I'm baffled.
That's just rude. That's just straight up rude.
I've heard of this happening from a few folks in the ADF tradition, because the ADF rituals, if you're not familiar with ADF druidry, ADF rituals follow a very different format than your standard Wiccan, Wiccanate, post-Wiccan kind of rituals. So, and they almost always do a pre-ritual talk and explain it, but I've heard of this happening in those contexts. I know it happened to my friend Steve in St. Louis when he was leading something. So people have asked me, what would you do in that? And, it's pretty much the same thing as altar on fire. It's, if I can't address it privately, and if it's been said publicly, you can't address it privately at that point. Your hands are now tied. If somebody has actually stepped into your ritual circle to tell you you're doing it wrong in front of everybody in your ritual, it's just like an altar on fire. Your ritual is, it's just like the polka music. Your ritual is disruptive. You must address the disruption before you can move on. It's like walking with a piece of glass in your foot. You cannot keep walking until the glass is out of your foot. So in that case, if somebody was being really rude and disruptive, I would step right in and say, well, so you and I come from different traditions. What I'm doing is fully appropriate to my tradition. What you're doing is unfortunately really rude and disruptive to the ritual. So I'm going to ask you to leave at this point. And if you can say it that calmly, kudos to you. That really is going to help keep your energy level smooth for the ritual and help you be able to recover that energy after. But, then you have to make the person leave. And if they're going to be really rude and disruptive and not leave, that's a whole separate issue. Typically at that point, people, that they'll storm off in a huff. That's pretty common. But, And then you can engage your altar on fire ritual scenario and you know.
Or you can be really rude and say, "Oh, I'm doing it wrong. Here you go. You lead it," and just take a step back.
Yeah,
But that's rude. That's me.
well, and it's not going to meet your intention. I mean,
No.
it's not. It's not really. I mean, if you just want to completely end the ritual at that point, you know, that's cool. But you know, and that's how I would handle it. Is the just, you know, when somebody brings something like that in, um, you've got to address it publicly, because there's no way to just ignore your way
If you
around
have
that.
any
So
questions about ritual facilitation or leadership for pagan groups, please feel free to contact me. I love questions, and I love writing articles or recording videos for actual issues that people are facing in the community. If this webinar is useful for you, please consider donating. It is my goal to make this education available for all, but to do that I have to pay the bills. I also have several books available, and there are links below under Show More, or you can contact me via my website or social media.